Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Unstoppable Podcast with Ralph Graves Jr. My name is Ralph Graves. I say it before every episode. I'm so glad that you chose to listen to this episode. I mean, you guys could be listening to anybody, but the fact that you stopped by here is it just makes me feel awesome. And so I always want to bring you guys to some great programming and some great guests. And I feel like I've arrived today because of my guest, author Nefertiti Austin. How are you today?
I am fantastic. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you here. Welcome to the Unstoppable Podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You have, and let me kind of set it up for the people listening. You have been, you wrote 3 phenomenal books. You've been published everywhere. I'm looking at my notes. You're Huffington Post, New York Times. I mean, the list goes on and on. PBS, it just goes on and on. I mean, it's so the life of a writer, not just a writer, but, one of the nation's top writers. How did that start? How did you begin? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. I began writing really as a little kid. My father used to write revolutionary poetry, and I was in the garage about a month ago, and I found a box of his stuff that I still have. And so you know how kids, we really do imitate our parents, and your kids are imitating you whether or not you realize it. And so he would sit with his yellow legal tab and write. And so, at 5, I'm doing the same thing, thinking I'm doing something. I wasn't doing anything, but that's what he did. So that's what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was a voracious reader. And I've fallen off quite a bit with my reading, but he always had something to read. And as a writer, there's 2 things you always do. You're always reading and you're always writing.
Yeah.
And so that was really how it began. And then I think what really sort of pushed me over the edge in junior high, I think they call it middle school now, I read Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. And
Yes.
Like so many writers, very heavily influenced by his words. And I think that was, I don't know what it opened for me, but it made me feel 13, 14 years old that I want to be a writer. That's what I want to be a lawyer, and I want to be a writer. And so that was really the beginning of my desire to be a writer. So then in high school, I was on the debate team, and there were competitions for expository comp. So I began writing a little more and sharing a little bit more of what I had been writing, and really carried this with me just for years and years. And it wasn't until I was in law school that I had written like the longest thing ever. It was like 52 pages. And I thought, oh my God, this is the longest thing. Right. And I had friends who were reading as I was writing, and they kept saying, keep going, keep going, keep going. And before I knew it, a couple things happened. So A, I get kicked out of law school, and B, I had a book to show for it, because that's what I was doing.
You got kicked out of law school?
Oh, yes, it was fantastic. And I'm grateful to the good people who saw what I could not see, was that I had no business there.
Right.
And so in any event, that was how the first sort of formal writing really began. Wow. And I was able to get 2 books published actually pretty quickly. I was in mid-20s, and then it would be another big gap before I got published again. But that was really how it started. Just my love of writing, my love of words, my love of books.
Well, you know what? And you just, you said it, you said something there, and I want to kind of key on, this is the Unstoppable Podcast. A lot of times we think because we get kicked out of something, fail out of something, dismissed from something, so many people think that's the end. What was that feeling? What was that moment? Because you were in law school, so you were getting it done.
Yeah.
What did that, when they said, hey, listen, Nefertiti, this ain't for you, talk about that.
It was a sigh, really, for me. It was relief. I always wanted to be a lawyer and a writer, always. And but I didn't know any writers. I didn't know how to make the leap from I want to be a writer to becoming a writer. So in undergrad, I thought, oh, I'll major in English, but it was very Eurocentric. It was very boring. So then I was like,
Right.
okay, that's not going to work. So then I thought, okay, I'll major in creative writing. I want to be a writer, right? So I'm going to
Yeah.
take some classes. And my counselor, he was fantastic. He said, you're young, you're 18 and you're still developing your style. I don't think that's a good suggestion because you don't know who you are yet. And you're going to get shaped before you're ready,
Right.
essentially.
Okay.
And so he's like, what do you like? And I said, well, I like history. And he said, okay, well, then you major in, what's going to be the fastest path to graduation. And that's what I did. Absolutely loved history.
Yeah.
So I finished undergrad, and the first year I did not get into law school because I didn't want to leave California. And
Okay.
so I only applied to a couple of schools. And so that should have been my telltale right there. The
Right.
fact that I
Right.
didn't cast a wide
Yeah.
net.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I take the LSAT again and I work at a law firm, and a very good friend of mine, he's a judge now in Boston. I remember distinctly, he said to me, I'm bored and I'm a lawyer and I'm a file clerk. He's like, you have to be bored. And I missed it. I didn't get what he was trying to tell me. I'm
Right.
22. Family expectations were in place because I had been saying this since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so I went along on this path, even though there were these little things along the way that suggested otherwise. So
Yeah.
I get to law school and I was bored. I didn't think it was hard. I just thought it was just incredibly boring. I felt oppressed. And
Right.
so I
Right.
was
Yeah. Yeah.
stressed. I was like, ugh. And the thing that gave me pleasure, that really gave me a release from the pressure that I felt, was writing. And I read Siddhartha. One of my dogs is currently named Siddhartha. So
Okay.
I read Siddhartha, and I'm thinking, oh, this is it. Like, my journey in life is to find myself,
Yeah.
not to become a lawyer. But I still didn't have the strength. I didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have the words to say to my family, I know I have been talking about being a lawyer forever, but I don't want to do this. So I continue on until I barely get kicked out, had to fight to get kicked out. And I did transfer to another law school. And so now I'm playing games because I'm calling the school and I keep pushing my
Right.
admissions back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I come in the fall? Oh, can I come next year? And then
Yeah.
one of my best friends, she was like, okay, it's not because you're not smart enough. That's not the issue. You don't want to do it.
Right. 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 Right.
I was like, okay, this is the truth here. And it was great. It was like the best feeling ever. I felt like my world opened up.
Yeah.
And I often think of how much different my life would have been. I obviously, would have figured it out, but I
Right.
don't know that I would have been as happy, or that I would have been as free, or that I would have taken as many risks. So it was really the official permission I needed to really craft my own way and live my
Yeah.
own dreams, and
Yeah.
to be willing to just be a risk taker, like whatever
Yeah.
that looked like.
Yeah. So many of us live to, especially when you're young, you live to these family expectations, and really, your family. I know for me, um, I would tell my kids, "Hey, listen, if it's not for you, get out of it now."
Yes.
And so, but sometimes the person thinks, "Oh my God, I'm letting my grandmother down, my grandfather down, my mom, and I'm letting them down because all my life I said I wanted to be thus and so," you
Yeah.
know, and having the courage, like you say, to free yourself to become who you
Yeah.
are now. Now you wrote some books, right? You
Yes.
wrote your early books were in the Black romance genre. Am I right?
Yes. Yes. Abandon and eternity. Yes.
Abandon and Eternity. How did you just get started? You were younger, right? Were you young, or were you
I
fresh out of law school, or
I only did a year of law school. So
yeah,
22, no,
22?
20, 23, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Were they easy to write? How did you get into that? You just said, "Hey, let me just start writing some fiction here."
Basically, I had that story I had been working on, and then it grew and grew and grew. And then I turned that into my first novel. And that was like right when Terry McMillan like blew up, Wait and Exhale.
Yeah, I
And
remember those books. Those books caught fire.
yes. And I remember reading those and I was like, oh, I can do that.
Right,
And
right.
so I'm self taught. and I just taught myself how to do it. And then once I had a manuscript, so in those days, it was the mail. You put the whole thing in the mail, you mail it off. And that was not the right thing to do. And I didn't know that. I didn't know how to do it. And so I had a friend who worked at Essence, and I went to New York to visit her. And one of the people she worked with, and I'm sure this lady doesn't even remember this, like over her shoulder, she was like, "Oh yeah, go get this book. And it's going to tell you how to write a query letter."
Okay.
And so I did what she said. I got a book on how to write a query letter. I wrote a query letter and I sent it to a few people. And then I obviously was the right person, and they were just starting a line of Black romances. And I didn't consider myself a romance writer. And so, but it was an opportunity, and I was like, oh, sure, I'll go for it. And I didn't have an agent, and I didn't need an agent. She was just acquiring manuscripts. And so that is how the first two books started. That was like fall, I think, 94. And I think on that line, the very first imprint, let me think, I don't know, maybe only 10 to 12 books were published. I could be mistaken about that, but I know there weren't very many of us. And then some of those women have continued. They still write romance. Excuse me, I got off the romance train because, again, I didn't see myself as a romance writer. And because we were a new imprint and we're Black, it had to be so pristine, and like, they couldn't curse, or it's like maybe 3 curse words in the whole book, and if they had sex, they could only have sex with one person, and there were so many restrictions. And I mean, I wasn't like Zane, nothing like that, but it was still very restrictive. So I was like, okay, here I find myself in another situation where it's a wonderful opportunity, but I'm being restricted, and that didn't appeal to my free spirit.
Yeah. And then you wrote this phenomenal book that is getting, I want to say, worldwide acclaim, especially in circles. You wrote a book called Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in America. And it's a nonfiction. Talk to us about how you came about, and I kind of know the story, but share with my listeners how you came about writing that book and the impact that it really has made. That book is really impactful for what's happening today.
Oh, thank you. So Motherhood So White came about really, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So I was really ready to be a mother, and I wanted to adopt. I wanted to be married and all that as well, but I really wanted to adopt first. And so my best friend is an adoption social worker, and we would talk, for years. I obviously knew quite a bit of information about that particular process. But when I went looking for information I was looking for a book about a single Black woman who decides to adopt on her own, no fertility issues. She's not worried. It's not a substitute for a boyfriend or a husband, none of those things. And I couldn't find anything. And this is, again, here I start in the height of something. So it's the height of the mommy wars. And you got all of these books that are doing great, Tiger Mom and Shitty Mom and Slacker Mom and all these different things. But their demographic were, middle to upper middle class white women. And if you fell outside of that, you couldn't find anything. And so I started writing early on because I didn't see myself on the page. And, certainly as a parent, there's a lot of stuff that's universal, but I needed to know, as a Black person, how do you go and tell your middle-class Black family, oh, by the way, not only did I not finish law school, not only do I refuse to get a full-time job, not only do I have 2 dogs, and I move when I feel like it, and I travel when I feel like it, I'm getting ready to introduce a child into my life. Like, what did that look like?
That we need a book on that.
Yeah, because we got strong opinions about things.
You just don't walk into a Black family and say, "Hey,
no.
I'm going to adopt a child." We're going to what?
Yeah. And it's a child I don't know. So it wasn't like it was a family member. So, so and so needs somebody to take her baby. No.
Yeah. Right.
So I never saw myself on the page in that respect. And so I began writing. And so that was the beginning of like 9 years, like the early years. Really, I was really kind of ranting because I noticed like a lot of racism within adoption because everything was the support was geared towards white people who were adopting children of color. And this is, 14 years ago. So it's,
Yeah, that was the popular thing to do.
hmm
Uh,
And so that was how that began.
Yeah, yeah. You said a mouthful. We as Black folks, African Americans, Black folks, however whatever the political term is, but you know what I'm saying. We're
hmm
quick to raise family members, and
hmm
we'll some babies in around church. We might even adopt. We even somebody
Oh, yes.
we'll unofficially bring a one of our own into our homes and
Yes.
raise them.
Yes.
And that's great. But to walk in and tell our family that we're going to go through this adoption process, you know, and I know that was a challenge in and of itself. Like you said, there's no books written about that. There's
Mm-mm.
no books written, and I had no idea that the level of racism that existed within the adoption agencies and adoption process.
Yeah, it's again, it's not geared for us. It's
Right,
geared for, white families who are adopting children of color.
right.
And there's been some movement in the last few years, but it's interesting that okay, so nationally, the majority of kids in foster care are white children. But then when you take a look at the numbers, Black children represent the largest demographic because we have the smallest population. We're
Right.
what, 12, 15% of the population, and 33% of our kids are in foster care.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's a really big number. So you would think that there would be more information about when you get your Black child there, and even as a Black parent, there are going to be things that will come up and
Yeah.
issues that you will have that you won't have if you have a white child.
Right.
And
Of
even
course.
adopting an Asian child is going to bring up, some issues.
Of course. Of course. Everything from health issues to societal
Yes.
issues.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I thank God for our white brothers and sisters that
Yes.
adopt African American children, but
Oh, sure.
you got to get the baby's hair done, and
You do.
you'll need some Black folks to teach you how to get that done.
And you have to be open to that and not take it personally. It's not an attack.
Right.
And they need lotion, and you can't
Yeah.
have them in an all white environment and raise them like they're white children because they are
Right.
not,
Right.
because once they leave your sight, the
Right.
rest of the world sees them for who they are, which is a Black boy or Black girl out in the world.
Yeah. 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 So motherhood so white. The
Mhm.
title. I was explain to me motherhood so white. Like the title. Where'd you derive that from?
So the title is a play on words. I had written an article called Adoptions. I think it was called Parenting So White or Parents Adoption So White, something like that. But
Yeah.
basically a play on Oscar So White. And
Gotcha. Okay.
so the
Yeah.
same concept that within motherhood there are definitely racial hierarchies, and one more again, Black women, we're at the bottom of the racial hierarchies for motherhood, because even the support that is given to white mothers isn't necessarily extended to Black mothers, and especially single Black mothers. And so there's still a lot of stereotype around
Right.
who a single Black mother is, and how she came to be a single Black mother.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then even the fact that Black people do adopt, I'm in a same race adoption, and my kids and I, we favor. So you're
Right.
not going to think, and you won't even know that my kids are adopted. But if it comes up,
Right.
it is in white spaces, adoption is very normalized. And so when I share, oh yeah, I'm an adoptive parent, it's kind of, it's like, oh, really. And
Right.
always the go-to is where are they from, because it's super popular to adopt a child from Ethiopia or someplace other than the public foster care system. And so
Yeah.
then when I say Los Angeles County, and I'm proud of that,
Right.
that's another thing. But just in terms of, like, we look at the numbers of Black maternal health and the fact that Black women die at outrageously higher rates than any other group in childbirth and before.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And and then just trying to get help in those spaces from the medical profession, and stress levels that occur for Black women. So we've got regular parental stress, and then we've got a layer of societal stress. Like, our mental health is in turmoil just on a regular day.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's not really discussed, but we hear a lot of, for moms, oh, take a nice bath, drink a glass of wine, and or go on a beautiful trip. And I'm in favor of all of that.
Right.
But if that's not in your budget, if you don't live near the coast, if if you don't have access to those things, and
Yeah.
then that's useless. It's like, no, I need to talk about the fact that, George Floyd was murdered. And I need to talk about the fact that Breonna Taylor was asleep and she was murdered,
Right.
and
Yeah.
Ahmaud Arbery was jogging, because that could be my child, or that could be me. And that's painful to me. And I'm carrying that around with me all the time, whether or not I'm talking about it.
Yeah. One more question about adoption. Are you finding that more Black families are adopting? Is this yes or no? I don't know.
You know what? I think so. What I have found through Instagram, I've only been on Instagram, I guess a couple of years now. I have found groups, which is wonderful and surprising, that cater to adopting Black children, and it's Black people encouraging other Black people to adopt. So I'm definitely seeing more of that, and seeing more Black adoptees be more public about their stories, because typically you have the Korean adoptees, Asian adoptees, who are very vocal about their experiences. So it's been really great to listen to
Yeah.
Black people talk about, oh, I was adopted by Black people, or white people, or whomever, and share their stories.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So you're
Mhm.
published everywhere, right? You have, when I say
Mhm.
published everywhere, how does one, and I'm looking at all the articles that you wrote and that you wrote, you know, I've sent things in and they make me feel like I'm a horrible writer. It's just constantly rejected. I mean, so,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an author. I wrote a book, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
And I sent things in and I don't care where I've said it, they reject, I see all of this. So what
Mhm.
would you tell someone who's really trying to get an article published in Huffington Post, New York Times, or whatever the case may be? Um, is rejection normal?
Oh my God, yes. Listen, as a writer, rejection is your friend. And I went 9 years getting rejected before I got an agent, who felt like she could sell my project. So,
Wow.
again, lots of racism in the publishing industry still.
Yeah.
The gatekeepers tend to be white women, and you've got some who are on top of it and really open to, okay, let's see what's out in the world, let's see
Yeah.
what needs to be out in the world.
Yeah.
And then you've got a lot who, and it isn't always one person's decision, but ultimately the decision becomes, oh, your story's marginal,
Right. Yeah.
which is code for it's not going to sell. And so
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's a business and people want to make money. And so it's like, okay, you say you want diverse voices, but then I pitch you and
Right.
you
Right.
reject my work. So rejection is a part of it. And as a writer, you definitely cannot, uh, you can't be deterred by it. If you have something to say, I would definitely say keep pushing. Now, what that may mean is that you won't get paid. I mean, I wrote for years and I would have things published and I didn't get paid. I mean, for years,
Yeah.
and that was fine. And then eventually there was a payoff. I get paid now, but every now and then I I'm in a different position now. So if I
Yeah.
pitch, for the most part, it's accepted. But
Right.
the pay equity, that's a whole nother issue. But definitely don't give up, and be willing to work for free.
Okay, sure. I just wanted some of our budding writers to understand that and not get discouraged in that. Um,
Oh
I
no,
wanted them to just stay consistent and
you must.
you'll get there. You'll stay. So what are you learning now? Before I let you go, what
Hmm.
what are you learning right now at this stage in your life where you are right now, have gone through that wonderful journey you just shared with us? What are you learning? What is Nefertiti learning right now?
Well, so before you press record, we were talking about children, and
Yes,
so I am
yes.
learning, because I've got a 14-year-old, and just really learn parenting's hard. I mean, I knew that before, and every stage is different, and it's fun, but it's hard. It definitely is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even with my 8-year-old, love her to pieces, but my God, sometimes I'm like, whoo.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that I'm learning, definitely like in the lit space, literary space, is that there are trends in literature. And so depending on sort of where we are in the world, that's going to drive, who gets published at that particular moment.
Sure.
And so, kind of back to the not giving up
Sure.
piece. And it's really being flexible. So, like, I have an idea for my next book, but I've been sitting on it for many, many months because I'm not sure just yet that that's something I really want to dive into. So, in the interim, my question to myself all the time is, okay, so then what are you going to write about? So, it's just a series of reinventions. My brand is motherhood. It's Black motherhood specifically, but it's motherhood and parenting. So
Right.
just making sure that when I write about other things, that I give myself enough flexibility. So it's really like, how do I, capitalize on the moment and stretch myself so that, again, free spirit, so that I'm not boxed in. So that's
Right.
what I'm learning and working on right now. Like, okay, let's like make sure that my net, that I get to cast a very wide net.
Very good. I just love what you're doing, and I thank you for just really filling the space that you're in. It's great to know that you're out there. It's great to know that you're being an advocate. Now, if someone wants to find you, wants to talk about you, or talk to you, I should say, or write you a letter, or talk about adoption, how do they find you?
That you can find me pretty much anywhere. So on Instagram, I am nefertitiaustin.com, and I respond. If you send me a note, I will respond.
Okay.
And on Twitter at Nefertiti Austin, and Facebook, same Nefertiti Austin. Or if you send an email, my website is www.nefertitiaustin.com, and there's a link to contact me, or it's boxes that you fill in, and it will eventually make its way to me, and I will respond.
So all things Nefertiti Austin, everybody.
Yes, you will
All
find me.
things Nefertiti Austin. Nefertiti, thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being such a great guest. Thank you for being such a phenomenal writer and inspiration, a great mom. Thank you for just being an impact and being as big as you are in our culture today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me and Motherhood So White on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Guys, you've been listening to the Unstoppable Podcast with Ralph Graves Jr. Listen, if you haven't, please go out and get Motherhood So White. Please go get that. Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in American nonfiction. It's an American nonfiction by Nefertiti Austin. Go get it. And while you get that, go grab Unstoppable by yours truly. 7 universal laws that'll change the way you pursue and achieve success. So guys, you've been listening to the Unstoppable Podcast. My name is Ralph Graves Jr. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys next time. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.